Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Outlandish Talmud Stories and Outstanding Life Lessons. Tonight's topic is why the world needs more empathy. I want to thank tonight's sponsor, Dr. Kika and Esther Garin, in honor of Kika Garin's birthday. Mazal Tov, may Hashem bless you with a Shnat Hatzlacha, successful year, happy, healthy year with your beautiful family. If you'd like to dedicate a class, there's a link there by the video, and you can help support what we do. I hope you enjoy it. You can download the source sheet for tonight. There's also the link is there as well on your video. Tonight we're studying a series of stories, short stories, but very powerful stories, outlandish stories with outstanding lessons from Talmud Brachot, page 5b. And tonight we're going to talk about empathy. You know, they say that a beggar once approached a very well-dressed woman on a fancy street in Beverly Hills. And he tells her, "Ma'am, I haven't eaten in 3 days." And the woman looks at him and says, "I wish I had your willpower." If it wasn't sad, it'd be funny. But this introduces us to the theme of empathy. Because so much of what's going on in our world, we look around and we feel like there's divisiveness and there's disagreements, different factions of people who are going on different paths in life. And we look at relationships and our people knowing and learning how to get along, and whether in intimate relationships, how intimate and how close are they really, in cordial relationships, professional relationships, social relationships, do we know how to do them right? Do we just surround ourselves by our echo chambers, by those who agree with us, who look like us, who behave like us, who come from the same backgrounds as we do? Do we know how to befriend others? Do we know how to make our social group a little more colorful and diverse, to include others who don't necessarily look like us or think like us or come from the same background or speak the same mama lashon, the same native tongue that we do? So a lot of things that are happening now where we need a lot of repair. And a key word into helping us through this is empathy. What is empathy? How do we practice empathy? And what does empathy achieve to help repair a lot of the breakdown in our world, in our societies? Those are the things that I'd like to study together with you today. We have a few stories that are short but are very powerful to teach us a lot of lessons about how to relate to another, how to connect with another, how to assist another, and how to be available to another person. So we're going to get started right away. Hope you've downloaded the source sheet. Talmud Brachot, page 5b. It's going to be 3 stories, and we'll walk through them, and then we'll try to come away with some important, outstanding life lessons, as we do always. So let's begin. Rebbe Yochanan. So let me give you some background, what's happening in the page or so before here in the Talmud, so you understand the novelty, you understand the beauty of what's being taught over here. So the background is that for the past page or two, the Talmud has been talking about Yisurin. Yisurin means those who experience suffering in life. Okay, all kinds of suffering, physical suffering, loss of children, loss of health, loss of death, illness, loss of a job, loss of fire, destruction, whatever kind of suffering someone could be experiencing. And, you know, we always ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And the truth is, this is worthy of a separate class. Maybe we'll do it another time to explore the previous pages of the Talmud. But what comes out in conclusion from the lengthy discussion is that though sometimes it is true that God is dealing with somebody with some harsh treatment because of perhaps something they deserve, because of some kind of tikkun, some kind of rectification, some kind of improvement they need to make in their lives. But often it could be that the reason why a person is receiving this yisurin, these sufferings and sorrows from above, is because it's called yisurin shel ahava, pain of love, pain out of God's love to you. As the verse says in scripture, et asher ye'av Hashem yochiach. Those who God loves, he reprimands. Just like you would treat your child with greater disciplinary measures than you would your child's friend coming to their house because you love your child more. So you would tell your child, don't do that. And your child's friend, you may not be so quick to reprimand him because you love them more. So the conclusion of the Talmud is that when great people suffer, it's a very harsh thing to say, but it's a reality. It's called Yisurin Shel Ahava, pain out of God's love. And therefore we speak about the very noble trait of people who know how to be Mekabel Yisurin Ba'ahava, those who know how to receive and embrace these sufferings with love, or besimcha, or with joy. And we know people, we all know such people, who maybe are going through very painful situations in life, but they accept it, they welcome it, they embrace it, and this is their lot, and they deal with it in a very joyful, happy way. How do they do that? And maybe it's because they've recognized this is the way God is treating them, partially simply because He loves them, and probably He's trying to achieve something with them, whether trying to push them, whether trying to bring out something better and deeper in their persona. Whatever the reasons that you would discipline a child for that matter. So that's the conclusion of the Talmud. When you see such sufferings, you should know that they may be a sign of God's love. And the Talmud concludes as well that by embracing that with great joy and confidence and happiness, there will be a lot of schar, a lot of reward as a result of that as well. So if you have that in mind, now you're going to truly appreciate even more tonight's stories. So let's begin. Rabbi Yochanan's student, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, fell ill. Now we've read about Rabbi Yochanan before. This is sometime in the 2nd century, and so Rabbi Yochanan has a number of very prominent students. One of them is Rabbi Chia, son of Abba, and he fell ill. Now, when we say fell ill, it's not clear what kind of illness we're talking about over here. It might simply be a physical illness. It might be COVID or whatever other viruses or other kinds of infectious diseases they were having at the time. But there are others that suggest that because of the language of the Talmud, which is the word cholash was weakened, that it might also be, it might even be like a mental ailment, like a form of depression or melancholy. So keep in mind, it could be any type of illness, and as we'll see further in the treatments, it may be interesting to think about if we're talking about maybe not a physical illness, but a kind of mental or emotional state of depression and melancholy. So Rabbi Yochanan fulfills the mitzvah, and we all know there's a big mitzvah of bikur cholim, the mitzvah of visiting the sick. This is one of the ways we actually emulate God, because the Torah says, be like God, be God-like, and the Talmud asks, how can you be like God? How can you connect with God? So there's a mitzvah to emulate God's ways. And what are God's ways? Mahu, Chanun, God is gracious, you be gracious. God is kind, you be kind. God is compassionate, you be compassionate. And we have a series of mitzvot that the Talmud says, based on this, when you do them, you're emulating God. For example, Hachnasat Orchim, welcoming guests into your home. We've spoken about this before. That selflessness to give your home to others. Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. As we know, God visits Abraham the 3rd day after his circumcision. Hachnasat Kala, helping support the bride and the groom towards their wedding and helping them get married and rejoicing with them in their wedding. There are others, Halvayat Hamet, escorting a dead, going to a funeral, especially when one doesn't have much family or friends, and being available to help them in that final passage of their life or afterlife is a big mitzvah. And the final one the Gemara talks about is Nichum Avilim, comforting mourners, going to a shiva home. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable for people to go to a shiva home. I don't know them so well. I'm going to be uncomfortable. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do there. It doesn't make good excuses. You don't have to say anything. You have to show up and be there because that's a sign of chesed, of kindness, comforting them, and that is being godlike. So Rabbi Yochanan is fulfilling the mitzvah of visiting the sick. He enters his home to visit him, and he says to him, "My dear student Rabbi Chia, is your suffering dear to you? Do you desire to be ill and afflicted?" Now you know what he's asking, right? Because we just concluded that a person of Rabbi Chia's stature who's in such a state of pain and suffering certainly is not deserving of it. He was a great sage, a big righteous tzaddik. He's not The only reason why this is happening to him is probably because his pains are in the category of Yisurin Shalahava, pains of love, which means God is treating you with love in a very harsh way, and it's tough love, and you should be embracing it with joy and happiness. So Rabbi Yochanan asked him, are you ready for that? Rabbi Chia said to him, I welcome neither the suffering nor its reward. Absolutely not. Even though I know, I'm sure he knew. I don't know if you learned the previous page of the Talmud. It wasn't printed in these times, but he knew. He knew that this might be an act of tough love from God. He knew that there's a value to rejoicing and embracing that treatment from Hashem. He knew there's great reward for behaving that way, and nonetheless, he says, absolutely not. I don't want the illness, and I don't want the reward. I want none of this. I mean, I'm not doing well. I'm really, really in a bad place. Which, just pause for a moment to think about his reaction, because the average person might be very astounded. Here, don't you know? Don't you know what the Talmud says? God is treating you with great love over here. There's a mitzvah to embrace it, to rejoice in it, to receive the reward from that. And he says, no, I don't want any of that. Which means sometimes when a patient is going through something, or a person who's going through a harsh time, and you want to tell them it's all for the good and God knows what he's doing, and you think you're comforting and consoling them, but really you're not. Because if they're not in a place where they can process that or recognize it that way, and they're choosing to process it differently, and they're choosing to say, I don't want this, I'm in a very dark place, I need to be out of this painful experience, you need to respect that. So Rabbi Yochanan doesn't push it down his throat. He doesn't say, why are you feeling so down? You should be happy. He asks him. Rabbi Chia responds, I don't want the suffering or the reward. And Rabbi Yochanan doesn't reprimand him, doesn't tell him off. He's actually going to help him, as we're going to find out. You know, the famous expression of the Talmud, I don't want the sting and I don't want the honey. Talking about the bee. Here, I don't want the suffering, I don't want the reward. So how does Rabbi Yochanan react? Listen carefully. He says, give me your hand. Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan stood him up, restored him to health. Fascinating. So he helps him, doesn't reprimand him. He recognizes the place that he's in, and he cures him. How does he cure him? So we're not really told in the Talmud. All we're told is that he gave him his hand. What does that mean? How does the hand cure somebody? So let's think about this for a moment, because there might be some very powerful lessons over here, right? Just pause for a moment. First of all, especially if this was, this may have been a physical ailment, as we said. We don't know what kind of illness it was. And it's told that Rabbi Yochanan was a miracle maker. So it may have been a miracle healer as well. So it could be, and this is already something we don't understand, but some people have these powers, that simply with the touch of his hand, I'm not sure what he did with his hand. Some commentaries write that, a doctor will inspect your hand, inspect your pulse, and learn a lot about your condition from your hand. Maybe that's why he took his hand. Or it could be he just performed a miracle, took his hand and magically, miraculously healed him. But even if you don't go to the realm of miracles, if this ailment was a mental ailment, a state of depression, Rabbi Yochanan says, here, let me touch you. Let me give you some physical warmth. Let's connect skin to skin. And we know today the power of physical touch, of affectionate touch. It literally heals people. It literally changes a person's spirit, and it changes a person's mood. Today, we know very much about parents with children, right? We didn't know about this maybe once upon a time. So maybe you were the kind of child where your parent was trying to sleep train, and they said they just put you down in their crib and let you cry even though you were so upset. Or they've said, I've done whatever I can. I fed you, I changed you, I burped you, and now you're still crying. Just enough. They put you down. Now, we're not judging any parents that have done that. And maybe parents still do that, and we don't judge, right? Everyone's trying to do their best. But what we do know over the past few decades is the unbelievable, enormous power of physical touch. We like to say you cannot spoil a child with too much touch, especially young babies. When you touch them and you cuddle them and you hold them, and especially skin to skin touch, it is therapeutic, it is healing, it is invigorating for a child. And not just a baby, even an older child. It could be a 10-year-old child, or it could be a teenager. And sometimes you'll see that the child is in a haze, in a mood, and they're going through something and they're feeling something and they're a mess. And so you could try to sit down and talk to them and explain to them what's going on. Why aren't you doing well in school? Why aren't you, why are you acting out? And why don't you have any friends? And why? You could try that, and you may have success with that. But there's something else you can do, which you will find has so much more power and influence. And that is simply take your child and hug them tight and rub their back and rub their arm and scrape through their hair, ruffle their hair. The human touch is incredibly therapeutic. And so Rabbi Yochanan, who may see Rabbi over here, who is down in the dumps, depressed and feeling completely no good, and Rabbi Yochanan says, here, give me your hand. And that touch, somebody loves me, somebody wants to connect with me, and that restores the spirit. That may be what happened. There's actually a story that Rabbi Shlomo Kalabach tells. And he tells a story that he used to go try to visit, especially downtrodden people, downtrodden Jewish people, wherever, try to restore their spirits. He would take his guitar. He had a wonderful skill for nigun, for singing songs. He always had a good story. He had a good vart, a good teaching, a good compliment. He was an enormous soul. He brought people to life. Anyone that was connected and around him, anyone who's been there, who was with him during his lifetime, will attest to that. So he had a custom of visiting prisons sometimes. Today it's more common that rabbis and others visit prisons, especially Jewish prisoners, help them with Shabbat festivals, Hanukkah's coming up, and go to a prison. It's very common. But then it was less common. And so he walks into a prison and he's, I guess, with a crowd that they brought before him, and he starts to do his shtick. He sings his songs, he plays his guitar, he tells them stories. He tries to bring their spirits a little more alive. And when he ends, he says, here, I want to give everybody a hug as I leave. And so everyone lines up, and he gives the first person a hug and he gives them a blessing. The second person a hug gives them a blessing. And somewhere down the line, he gives somebody a hug and gives them a blessing. Let's go. And they're about to move on to the next person. When that person calls him back and he says, Rabbi, is it okay? Could I get another hug from you? He says, sure. And he gives him another hug. And he's about to move on. And the third time, Rabbi, I'm so sorry. I know your time is so precious, but if I could be indulgent and ask you for another hug, please. And he gives him another hug. And the boy and the prisoner is crying. And he tells Rabbi Kalabach, Rabbi, I want to tell you, if I would have received more of these when I was a child, maybe I wouldn't be where I am today. Very powerful story. On a more spiritual level, the idea of giving the hand, some of the commentators explained, is very powerful because a hand in Hebrew is yad. Yad means a hand. Now, yad is the two Hebrew letters of Yud Daled, which the gematria, the numerical value of yad, is 14. Yud is 10, Daled is 4, 14. And maybe the hand is called the yad because how many bones are there in our fingers? 3, 6, 9, 12, 14. There are 14 bones in the fingers, so it's called yad. I'm going to read the comments here. The power of giving chizuk through touch. The touch transfers strength. Let me just pull this up on the screen so everybody can read Gary's comments. The key is to identify and know what the person needs at that moment. So, yeah, Gary, it's very powerful. Agreed 100%. So thank you for sharing that. Now, the yad is the hand. So now, when I take my hand and I extend it to you and I shake your hand, you have yad times 2. Yad, yad. What does yad spell? It spells yedid. Yedid. What does the word yedid mean? A beloved friend. Not just a casual Facebook friend, a true beloved friend. So the handshake, right? To know how to give a handshake. I remember growing up as a child, and I would come to shul, and my father would tell me to go to my grandfather to say good Shabbos, and another person, right? So I was wishing a lot of people good Shabbos. But there was one person always I used to walk by him and wish him a good Shabbos, and when he gave me a handshake, it was different than everyone else's handshake. And I learned from that. It was a mindful handshake. It was a strong handshake. It was a handshake like, I'm really shaking your hand. Not casually, but genuinely. I learned a lot from that. I mean, that creates an enormous connection. So the yedid is the two hands coming together. What is the numerical value of two hands? If one hand is 14, yad is 14, yedid is 28. 28 in Hebrew is koach, which means strength. When two hands come together, it creates a source of strength. And so Rabbi Yochanan is giving his hand to Rabbi Chia. And in a way of true yedidus, in a way of true friendship, he's saying, here, you have my hand, we have each other, and together we're strong. And with that, he brings him back to life. There's one more commentary that I saw on this. He goes a little further, because when I was first reading the Talmud, I imagine he extended one hand to his one hand, and he picked him up and he restored him. But it could be, I don't know, maybe he stretched out both hands. Let's think about both hands. So if you count the 14 of the fingers, and then you have 15 of your palm, and then 16 of your hand, and 17 of your arm. So if you tally the total of the full hand, it's 17, 14, 15, 16, 17. Okay? Now 17 is toiv. The numerical value of that in Hebrew is toiv, is good. So when you stretch out your hand to someone else, that is goodness. And when your hand connects with their hand, you have a double goodness. So a lot of good can come out of a genuine handshake. Now, if you can imagine, it's my two hands to your two hands. So I'm grabbing you in an act of friendship. I'm taking you into my embrace. So we have 4 hands over here. 4 times 17 is what? Let's see if this works. 4 times 17 is 68. Very good. What is the numerical value of 68? What's another word in Hebrew? The word chayim. Chayim means life. Literally, when my hands embrace your hands and we come together with a genuine closeness and care with each other, we restore life. And here, Rabbi Chia restores life, chayim, to Rabbi Yochanan restores life to Rabbi Chia. Okay, that's the end of story number 1. Let's continue story number 2. Similarly, Rabbi Yochanan once fell ill. The healer, the miracle healer, he actually himself falls ill. Another student, Rabbi Chanina, enters to visit him, doing the mitzvah of visiting the sick. And he asks him the same question. Is your suffering dear to you? Are you ready to, why aren't you embracing this with great joy? He walks in and he sees he's very down and he's very depressed and he's very upset. Why are you like this? God is giving you love. So Rabbi Yochanan tells him, no, same response. Maybe he learned it from Rabbi Chia. He says, I welcome neither this suffering nor its reward. I don't want it. I want to be better. Some of the commentaries say that the reason why they were insisting on rejecting the notion of this is God's love and embracing it that way is because the illness was preventing them from studying Torah. And it says that if the illness prevents you from studying Torah, then it cannot be a virtuous illness. Perhaps that's the reason. So he said, I don't want it. I want to be better. So Rabbi Chanina said, okay, fine. Give me your hand. He gave him his hand. And Rabbi Chanina stood up and restored him to health. Rabbi Yochanan stood up, and I think it's a mistake there, and restored him to health. Same story, different characters. Now it's Rabbi Yochanan that's ill. Rabbi Chanina comes in, and with the same hand, the 2 hands, the koach, the strength, the yedidus, the friendship, the miracle healing, the full embrace, the restoring to life, however it was, he brought him back to health. Now, here the Gemara asks a question. I'm sure you have this question. The Gemara asks, why did Rabbi Yochanan wait for Rabbi Chanina to restore him to health? Don't we know from the first story that Rabbi Yochanan is a miracle healer? He proved it. He took Rabbi Chia's hand in the first story and he restored him to health just like that. So if Rabbi Yochanan has the skill to heal that way, and now he's down in the dumps, why didn't he heal himself? Right? Why did he remain in a very bad, painful place, and he should have Rabbi Chanina has to come and then heal him? He could have healed himself. So the Gemara gives a very important answer, one that is a key to the topic of tonight. And the Gemara says, right, if he was able to heal his student, let Rabbi Yochanan stand up himself. So the Gemara answers. There's a famous expression. In Hebrew, the expression is, in the original, Ein chavush matir et atzmo, which in English it means a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. Rather depends on others to release him from his shackles. If you're stuck, you're shackled, you're in prison, you're in the mud, you're stuck in a bad place, very often, I'm not going to say always, but very often, you can't you can't be the answer to your sorrow. You need somebody who's not stuck like you to lift you up, to take you out, to bring you out of where you are. Rabbi Yochanan could help Rabbi Chia when Rabbi Chia was sick, but when Rabbi Yochanan was sick, he was unable to heal himself and needed somebody else to come and heal him. This is a very powerful idea. It's brought down kind of display of this. Historically, we know that Moses was the great savior of the Jewish people. He's the one that took them out of Egypt, right? Now, why Moses? So Moses was obviously a very special person. Goes without saying. But what do we know about Moses? So when Moshe Rabbeinu is born, the Torah has an interesting language. It doesn't really identify his parents properly in the beginning. The Torah just says, "Vayelech ish mibet Levi, vayikach et isha mibet Levi." A man from the tribe of Levi goes and marries a woman from the tribe of Levi, the Levite tribe, and then they go ahead and have the baby Moshe. So all the commentaries say, why don't you just identify their names? That it was Amram and Yocheved. Why do you have to tell us a person from the tribe of Levi? Why the emphasis on being from the tribe and the children of Levi? So the idea, which to explain from Moshe Rabbeinu, is that the savior for the Jewish people had to come from the tribe of Levi. Why? Because when the Jews were enslaved in Egypt, we know all Jews, all tribes were enslaved except for one. The tribe of Levi was never really part of the subjugation, the torturous slavery in Egypt. Therefore, when it came to redeeming the Jewish people, one of the slaves could not be the redeemer also. The slave is imprisoned. Only a member from the tribe of Levi, who is not really imprisoned, could come and redeem and free those prisoners. So it's Moshe from the tribe of Levi. Moreover, Moshe has a very unique childhood, a unique upbringing. He wasn't even raised in a Jewish home. He wasn't even raised amongst the tribe of Levi. Where was he raised? We know as a baby he was taken to the house of Pharaoh, by the daughter of Pharaoh, and he was raised as a prince in the palace. So it's always a wondrous thing and something we reflect on, and the commentaries talk about a lot. The grand savior of the Jewish people is actually somebody who was raised as a prince probably until his teenage or adult years in the house of Pharaoh. It's a very strange thing. A member from the house of Pharaoh is the one that ends up coming up and redeeming the Jewish people. But the answer is that redeeming the Jewish people from Egypt wasn't just about taking a slave nation out of the shackles of the Egyptians. It was about turning a slave nation into a free people. Okay? Now, a nation that's already several generations in slavery, so everyone alive right now is born into this kind of life, and they're slaves not just physically with their torture and their labor, but they're slaves in their minds and in their hearts, and they have the whole disposition and attitude of what a slave has. You're going to walk out and become a free man and recognize what freedom feels like and tastes like and how to behave like a free man you don't even know. And how can you be the one to redeem others? Only a Moses that was not at all a slave ever, not even on the slave field, but rather came from a home of an aristocratic home, the home of the king, a free man like that. He's the one that is able to take a nation out of their slavery, not just out of the geographic boundaries of Egypt, but out of the very notion of slavehood into becoming a free people. Ein chavush matir atzmo. A prisoner cannot free themselves. There's actually a very interesting concept here also. When we talk about prayer. So sometimes we say, and there's actually a measure that teaches that when a person is not doing well, needs God's compassion, they're ill or whatever, it's most powerful, most effective when that person prays for himself. Better that the sick person prays for himself. That's more powerful than when someone's praying on his behalf. And we have a proof for that. The proof for that is that when Hagar is banished from the house of Abraham together with her son Ishmael because Sarah felt that Ishmael was being a bad influence to Yitzchak. So they go out into the desert, the water runs out, the food runs out. Now Ishmael, the young boy, is thirsty and he's dying. He's not going to survive. He's not going to make it. So Ishmael is the sick person, and now Ishmael prays to God, and Hagar prays to God for her son. Now the Torah says that Vayishma Hashem, and God heard. What did God hear? He heard the voice and the prayers of Ishmael, and he responds and he creates this miraculous well, a spring in the desert. And the commentators ask, only Ishmael prayed. Hagar also prayed, right? Why didn't God hear the prayers of Hagar? So the answer is, I'm sure he heard the prayers of Hagar, but the prayers coming from the mouth of the sick person himself are even more powerful. So we sometimes say that. However, it's brought down in even a stronger way that when you pray for somebody else, not for yourself. And your prayers for somebody else are more effective for that person than that person's prayers themselves. Based on this idea that a sick person, an imprisoned person, can't be the source of their redemption, the source of their healing. Someone else can be the source of that person's healing. And so you praying for someone else is really much more powerful. And we see that in this week's Torah portion, where Yitzchak marries Rebecca, and they didn't have children for a very long time. So we're told that both Yitzchak and Rebecca go and pray to Hashem. They pray to God. Rebecca's praying, God, give me a job. Yitzchak is praying, God, allow my wife to be pregnant to have a child. And the Torah says, Vaye'ater lo. And God responds to his prayers, Yitzchak's prayers. Why Yitzchak's prayers? Rebecca also prayed. Why not respond to her prayers? So of course he's responding to her prayers. But what moved Hashem more, moved God more, were the prayers of Yitzchak praying on behalf of Rebecca. So much so that we say that when you're able to act selflessly, which is actually, this is not, let's talk about the other person. It's an act of selflessness because you have your own needs, no question about it. But you're able to overlook them or forego them for a moment and think about someone else's needs first. So when you put your needs aside and you reach out to think and pray for someone else, then God will know, will respond in kind and reach out to you to fill your needs for you. So in the end, it's a win-win situation. You pray for someone else, and that person, it's a more effective prayer for that person, and then also you benefit the reward as well. Okay, let us continue. We're up to our third story now. The Gemara relates another story about Rabbi Elazar. He was another one of Rabbi Yochanan's students, and he also fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan enters to visit him, to visit the sick. He saw that he was lying in a dark room. What does that mean? Why was he lying in a dark room? So it can mean a number of things. It could mean that he was so sick and no one was taking care of him, and there was no one to even light the candles. So he was totally neglected as a patient. So the room was dark. It could mean he was so poor, which he was, he didn't even have any money to illuminate the room with candles. Or it could mean that it's metaphoric. Rabbi Elazar was in a very dark place. And based on his health condition, and based on the way that he was dealing with it, he was like the previous examples. He wasn't embracing it like love from Hashem. He wasn't in that place. He was in a place of, I am feeling down. And I'm feeling like I'm stuck. Physical illness and mental illness. And I want to be better. And I want to be done with this. I'm living with a black dog in my heart, in my mind. And so it was a dark, when Rabbi Yochanan walks in, he senses a darkness. There are people, sadly, who live in that darkness. And when you're around them, you can look into their eyes, you can look into their face, you can see a darkness. You can see the pain is all over their face. And even if externally they may be behaving differently and trying to put on a facade, but if you're sensitive to them, you know that they're going through darkness. So that's what's happening over here. Now, Rabbi Yochanan exposed his arm, and light radiated from his flesh, filling the house. Interesting. So, what happened here? Obviously, Rabbi Yochanan he has an agenda to illuminate the room because it's so dark I can't even see where I'm going, and I want to visit you and talk to you and pray for you. So he probably physically turns on some light and some candles, But it also says that he exposed his arm, which radiated the house. What does that mean? Rabbi Yochanan, we may have learned this once before, Rabbi Yochanan was known to be a very beautiful, handsome person. In fact, he says, I'm the most handsome person in all of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem was filled with handsome people and pretty women. And Rabbi Yochanan was the most handsome. And the Gemara says, how handsome was he? He was as handsome as if you take a shiny silver goblet with ripe pomegranate seeds and some leaves around it, and it's sort of in the shadow in the sunlight day. I don't remember the exact description, but if you look at that painting and you think about how gorgeous that is and how enlivening that is, that was the beauty of Rabbi Yochanan. His beauty, which is a physical beauty, but also a spiritual beauty, a beauty of the spirit. He was a beautiful person. His presence, his beautiful presence, illuminated the room. Now, maybe more than that, there may be some kind of miracle light radiating from his shiny glow, his skin. It could be, but it's just a very beautiful presence of his that brought light into the room. Now, the Gemara says, then he saw that Rabbi Elazar was crying. Now that the room is lit, physical light, the radiance of Rabbi Yochanan, he sees that he's crying. Now, hold on a moment. You don't need light to know that someone's crying. You need light to see someone crying, but you can know someone's crying before you see them crying. Why? Because you hear them crying. A cry is something you can hear. So what? Just think about this. Rabbi Yochanan walks in, he's not aware that Rabbi Elazar is crying. He's aware of the darkness. Then he illuminates the room and suddenly he sees the person crying and now he knows that he's crying. And beforehand he didn't hear him crying. Why all of a sudden you know he's crying? So here's another important lesson, especially in empathy. When Rabbi Yochanan first walked in, he was coming in as a visitor. I'm doing my duty. I'm paying my respects. I'm being a nice person, which is all very nice and it's a mitzvah, great. But that doesn't mean that you've reached a place where you want to sit and connect with that person, where you want to empathize with that person. You want to really discover what's going on with them, how you can help them. For that, you have to put yourself aside a little bit. When you walk in all smug and you say, I'm coming to do a big mitzvah over here, and I'm coming to, the famous joke that they say a person, a very wealthy miser of town, and he's once sitting in his home, he had a lot of money, he never gave an ounce of charity, but one night late, there's a knock at the door, so he opens the door and there's a beggar, another beggar joke. There's a beggar who says, I haven't eaten in days, I'm gonna die if you don't feed me, please give me something to eat. So the miser says, you know I don't give any charity, you're in the wrong address. He says, please, if you don't help me, I'm not gonna survive. So he goes to the kitchen and he finds like a spoiled, moldy piece of bread or fish. He's not gonna give him from his delicious dinner. And he throws it at him and he slams the door. The next morning he goes to the synagogue and he learns that this is a person sick in hospital. They're praying for him in the synagogue. So he goes to visit him. And this is the person, right? He got sick, of course, because he ate that moldy piece of bread. But he does a mitzvah. He goes to visit him. He visits the sick. And then later in the afternoon, he hears that person passes away. So he goes to the funeral because there's a mitzvah. That's what I meant. We said, accompanying, escorting the dead at the funeral. And then he goes to the person's home and with their family or whoever was sitting there, he does the mitzvah of Shiva. He comforts the mourners. And that night he comes home with a big smile on his face and his wife asks him, what are you so happy about? And he says, you see, one smelly piece of bread and I can fulfill 4 mitzvot. Never feel smug when you do a mitzvah. A mitzvah is, I'm humbling myself. I'm connecting, committing myself to do a good for somebody else. Not to make me feel good, like I've done my duty. So Rabbi Yochanan originally was not hearing the cry of Rabbi Elazar. Why? Because he wasn't connecting yet. But only after he saw the darkness and he was moved by it. And now he starts to radiate, which means he starts to be present. And he says, I want to figure out, I want to connect with Rabbi Elazar and his plight and what's going on over here. All of a sudden, he can hear the cry. You hear when you're sensitive to something. So now he hears the cry. So he asks him, why are you crying? Why are you crying? And now he tries to comfort him. And he says, I'm skipping the next line. Now he tries to comfort him. And he says, if you're weeping because you did not study as much Torah as you would have liked, maybe you're crying because it's already been a while, you've been not well, you haven't studied as much Torah as you would have wanted to, so you're upset that you have another chance. No, that's no reason to cry. Because we learned, we have a teaching that one who brings a substantial sacrifice and one who brings a meager sacrifice have equal merit as long as he directs his heart toward heaven, which is a beautiful teaching. It says, it's taken from the Torah. The Torah talks about if you were a wealthy person, you brought the animal offering, and the Torah says, Reach nichoach, that is a pleasant aroma to God. If you were of less means, you brought the flour offering, which is much cheaper. But the Torah again says, Reach nichoach, it's a pleasant aroma to God. So the Talmud learns out from that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're not able to afford the big, expensive offering and all you could bring was the simple, small one. It's of equal value to Hashem. Why? Because it's not about the amount of money you spent and the size of the gift, but it's about your heart. It's about what your kavanah, what your intention was. As long as you're directing your heart towards Hashem, as long as you've done the best that you could, you haven't short-changed God, but you've done whatever you can, no matter what the size, God welcomes that. So he told Rabbi Elazar, it doesn't matter if you couldn't spend an extra hour, an extra day learning Torah. When you studied Torah in the moments that you had, it was with a pure, sincere heart. So God welcomes that offering like he would welcome the offering of someone else who has 24 hours a day to study Torah. So don't worry so much. Don't be so in pain. Now, apparently, that didn't really work. Rabbi Elazar is still crying. So he tries something else. You know, when you go to a shiva home, when you go to a hospital to visit somebody, you're always not sure if you're saying the right thing, right? And you have to be very careful what you say. There's a lot of silly, unsensitive things that could be said in those situations. You have to be very careful, a little bit prepared for it. So he says, okay, maybe you're weeping because you have no parnasah, you lack sustenance, you can't support your family, you're so upset that you're not able to make a parnasah. Because he was a very poor person. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no, don't worry about it. Why? Not every person merits to eat off two tables. Not everyone can excel both in Torah study and make a good parnasah. We call it Torah ugdula b'makom echad. Some people have the gifts of two tables. They have excellence in Torah study, excellence in piety, and also excellence in wealth. Right? I have such examples of people, historically also. Rabbi Yochanan says, not many people can ever achieve that. You've excelled in Torah, so you didn't excel in parnasah, in wealth. Don't be so upset about it. You're not a failure. Right? A lot of people feel like a failure when they don't make the wealth like their friends and their social circles. You're not a failure. You did your best. Don't be so down. This implies, by the way, that his illness was more of a depression than something else, right? It still wasn't working. He wasn't reaching the heart of Rabbi Elazar. He wasn't addressing the real issue. So then he says, maybe you're crying over children who have died, right? He lost a child. Maybe that's why you're upset. Rabbi Yochanan says, well, listen here. Here is the bone of my 10th son. Rabbi Yochanan had 10 children who passed away before him. And when his 10th child, his final child passed away, he kept one bone from that child, and he kept it with him wherever he went, as a reminder. His 10 children. We can't even think about it, imagine the kind of pain. Rabbi Yochanan lived with this pain all his life. So he's telling Rabbi Elazar, if that's your pain over the loss of your child, you lost a child, I lost 10. By the way, that's also not a very helpful comment to tell somebody, someone's complaining, they have a headache, they're not feeling well. You have a headache. Oh man, my head's been killing me for days. That doesn't make somebody feel any better. Comparing, extent and degrees of suffering. So Rabbi Yochanan is trying to help him, but nothing is working. So Rabbi Elazar says to him as follows. He says, I'm not crying over my misfortune, over my inability to achieve parnasah, over my inability to study as much Torah. That's not what I'm crying. Crying, he says, over this beauty of yours that will decompose in the earth. In other words, he says, let's just understand what he's saying. He's saying, I'm crying it because I'm reflecting on the mortality of myself and of you. I'm realizing how fragile life is. This was a very existential angst that he was going through. Life is fragile. Life is short. I'm not going to be forever. I'm not here for much longer. How much have I accomplished already? What's the point of my entire life? What have I gained? What have I achieved? Who am I? Like, those are questions that shouldn't be asked, at least too often. Occasionally could be a healthy exercise, but not very often. And if they are, look what happens. You fall into that state of illness like Rabbi Lazar. Now, when he explained his existential angst and why he's so much in pain, that was a shake-up, wake-up call to Rabbi Yochanan also. Rabbi Yochanan says, oh boy, I don't think about that too much, but now that you remind me, yeah, my beautiful body, my beautiful identity, me, I'm also not going to be around for much longer. So it says that what? Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, well, then it's certainly appropriate to weep. Those are very painful thoughts. And so then both cry. He cries together with me. Another powerful empathy lesson, which we're going to expound upon once we finish these stories. Cry together with the person, because he felt that pain as well now as well. Meanwhile, Rabbi Yochanan says to him, same spiel as before. Is your suffering dear to you? Why can't you embrace it? Do you want to embrace it? Rabbi Lazar says to him, no, I don't want the suffering. I don't want the reward. I want to get it. I want to be out of this darkness. Upon hearing this, Rabbi Yochanan said, give me your hand. He gives him his hand. And Rabbi Yochanan stood him up and restores him to health. Same ending for all three stories. So we're getting the sense over here, we're learning about the idea of empathy. What is empathy? And what can empathy achieve? A lot of people confuse sympathy with empathy, and they're not the same thing. Sympathy is, I feel for you. And empathy is, I feel with you. Very different. One word, but very different. Someone might be in a lot of pain. Now, when someone comes to you in a lot of pain, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a friend, it could be anybody. Any kind of pain, physical pain, emotional pain. How do you react? Now, we're not talking about somebody who's really a jerk and couldn't care less about somebody else. You're in pain, doesn't take it seriously. Okay, we're not even talking about such people. We have to give another class for those kinds of people. But for an upstanding, decent human being, and someone's in pain and they're reaching out to you for help, what should you do? What do you do? So it's natural for a person to have rachamim, to have compassion, and to say, look, I see how much pain you're in, right? And to try to help the person, right? But sympathy is when there's still two separate people over here. There's that person in his plight and his pain, and then there's me. It's not my plight, it's not my pain. I'm observing you, and now I'm trying to figure out how I can help you. You start to offer ideas, start to offer solutions, which is nice, right? Better than the person that's a jerk, right? I want to help you. How can I help you? That's simple. But then there's empathy. Empathy is not, I want to help your pain, but empathy is, you learn how to put yourself aside, because this is not about you right now. You're fine. So this whole encounter, you're not necessary over here. Take yourself away and learn to, in the sages in the words of the famous expression, put yourself in that person's shoes. Or as the Talmud says, put yourself in their place. And when you do that, feel that pain. And it's not, here's another distinction, a more slighter distinction between sympathy and empathy. It's not, imagine the person's in a state of pain, but really the reason why they're there is because they were a little negligent. They did things wrong, lived their life negligently, now they're right physically. So imagine I told him, I feel your pain, but that but can kill everything. But yeah, you could have made better decisions leading up till now, and yada yada yada. And I'll explain to you why. That's sympathy. That's not empathy. When the person is in pain, it's irrelevant about the negligent steps they took to get to where they are. What's important is their pain right now. So empathy is no buts. It's just I'm with you. You're in such a difficult place, and once you're in that place, you can help them. You can help them in all kinds of ways. So it's very important for relationships, right? Empathy is a key tool in a relationship because a true relationship means you want to be able to be one and connect with somebody else. A relationship without empathy is going to be a very superficial, shallow relationship. Maybe it's based on common interests, or we have what's in gain. There's all kinds of agendas, there's all kinds of reasons and goals in this relationship. But if it's a true relationship, we just want to be one. We're together in this. Then we're together in this. Another famous story of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was one of the great rabbis in Jerusalem, passed away 20 years ago. Once his wife had an ailment in her leg. He took her to the hospital. When the doctor came to see them, he said, "Doctor, our leg is hurting. Our leg is hurting." It is, right? It's ours. So that's empathy. So I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you two stories. One is a story of the two children of Reb Shmuel of Lubavitch. He was the fourth Chabad Rebbe. He had two children. He's known as the Rebbe Maharash. These two children, one of them became the next Rebbe, Reb Shalom Goldberg, the Rebbe Rashab, and his older brother was Reb Zalman Aaron, known as the Razor. Razor Reb Zalman Aaron was the older brother, Rashab was the younger brother. Now there were two younger brothers, and they would play games with each other, right? Often they would actually play a game called Rebbe and Chassid, master and student, teacher and student. And they would play the games with each other. So one time they played this game where the older brother, the Razor, was the Rebbe, the younger brother, Rashab, was the Chassid, was the student. And so I guess they dressed up, like kids dress up, put on a fancy hat, a fancy tie. I don't know how they dressed it up. But the younger brother comes in to have an audience with his Rebbe, his older brother. And he starts to express a difficulty and a challenge he's having in his spiritual life. And he really bears his heart about he needs some help with something. And the older brother, being the Rebbe, offered him a solution. You should do this, that, and the other. The mother overheard this whole story. And a little while later, she notices that the younger brother, the Rashab, did not take that advice because he wasn't doing any of what he was told to do. So she walked over to the younger brother and says, "Why didn't you accept the advice of the Rebbe, your older brother? I see you're not doing it." So the younger brother says, young but such a clever boy, he says, my older brother, he's no Rebbe. He's no spiritual master. She says, "Why?" He says, "Because when you go to a spiritual master and you bare your heart and you express what you're going through and you're looking for assistance, the first thing a Rebbe does is they sigh. And then they give you their advice. It's not the advice that helps you so much, but it's the sigh of the Rebbe that helps you more. My brother, he didn't sigh. He just gave me advice. That's not a Rebbe. A sigh with someone who's going through something can be more helpful than all the advice in the world. Right? Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and the founder of logotherapy, who was the great psychotherapist, they say the story about him, that he once got a phone call in the middle of the night. And it was a girl who was committing suicide, planning to commit suicide that night. And this is a patient of his for a long time. And now she calls him up in the middle of the night and she says, "Doctor, I'm doing it tonight. I'm jumping off the bridge." And, he just woken up in the middle, but this is a scary moment. So he spends time with the patient. And he's talking to her and he's trying to explain things to her and he's trying to stop her from killing herself. And they spend the whole night, literally till the next morning, on the phone. Eventually the phone call ends. And he goes to sleep and he thinks to himself, I really hope that I helped her. And he falls asleep. And he wakes up and he's always wondering, what happened to her? And a couple of weeks later, she walks into the office for her appointment. And he says, wow, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm so happy that you didn't do what you were planning to do. If I may ask you, what was it that I said that changed your mind? And she told him, Doctor, I'll be honest with you. The truth is, nothing that you actually told me helped convince me. No argument, no reason, no explanation. Nothing that you said made me change my decision. But you know what made me change my decision? The fact that there was somebody out there who was willing to spend hours with me on the phone in the middle of the night. The fact that you cared, that made me change my mind. That is something that's not easy. We have an easier time fixing people's problems. I'll give you solutions. You ask me a question, maybe I'm clever, maybe I have experience, I'll give you my answer. Before you give your answer, first identify with the problem. Understand that person's pain. Become connected with them. Because if you don't, you'll never truly help them. You'll be an outsider, throwing ideas, suggestions, which may work a little bit, but you can't bridge gaps that way. And so in an environment where people are different from each other, think differently, behave differently, look differently, and we're looking to understand each other. The first agenda, right? Maybe I disagree with you. Maybe I don't believe in your politics, or I don't agree with your religious paths or definitions, or we disagree about everything. But do I even have an interest of understanding you? It's not about I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong. Who's right? And even if I feel that I'm right and you're wrong, but you're still a person, and you still have your beliefs with conviction, why wouldn't I want to understand you first? And if I don't try to understand you, I'll never be able to help you. And we see this theme in the stories of the Talmud throughout. When Rabbi Yochanan visits the sick, and he's not judging them, and he's trying to connect and understand and feel their plight. Because he says, that's what I'm here for. I can't be helpful if I'm not joining you in your place. Listening. Right? There's a beautiful article that I read recently. A doctor who takes the word empathy and takes all the letters of the word empathy, E-M-P-A-T-H-Y, and says, these are the 7 steps you should take. Take the 7 letters, you'll know the 7 steps of empathy. If you truly want to be able to reach out and connect to someone to actually help them and be effective, then these are the 7 steps. Let's go through them briefly. E. E stands for eye contact. All right, an appropriate level of eye contact makes people feel seen and improves effective communication. Don't look away. Don't talk to somebody from behind them. That's why phone calls are not as effective. Then eye-to-eye contact. So talk with 4 eyes with each other. That creates a connection. We are seeing in a generation that spends their time over the phone or with texting. And when they come with actual person, eye contact is difficult. Because eye contact is really connection, right? And we forgot how to connect. We're just like communicating, but not connecting. Eye contact. That's E. M. Muscles in facial expressions. As humans, we often automatically mimic other people's expressions without even realizing it. By being able to identify another's feelings, often by distinctive facial muscle patterns, and mirroring them, we can help communicate empathy. So there's this whole concept in psychology, especially where a doctor and patient, or any 2 people, where 2 people sitting with each other mirror each other. You know, often if you'll be in a certain posture like this, you'll see the other person. You could try it out. You're spending time with your friend another time. Put yourself in a certain way. Cross your legs, sit forward, sit back, and give it some time. And the other person will, if they're engaged in the conversation, if they're focused on you, their body and their posture will start to mirror yours. I mean, if they're not going to start to mirror yours, maybe they're not so engaged in the conversation. So this is a bit instinctual, but it's actually a tool to deliberately use when trying to empathize and connect with somebody. Follow their expressions, follow their body language, and mimic it, because there you have a connection going with each other. So that's M. P is posture, a very similar thing. But the way, this is not about mirroring their posture, but it's about the way you assert your posture. Sitting in a slumped position can indicate a lack of interest, dejection, or sadness. Sitting upright signals respect and confidence. I'm here to help you. I want you to have trust in me. I'm not going to slouch. Slouch tells you I'm not really here. When you're really into somebody, you're leaning forward. Your eyes are gazed on them. You're totally focused on them. That's P for posture. A, empathy. A is affect, or emotions. Learning to identify what another is feeling and naming it can help us better understand their behavior or the message behind their words. Frame what they're going through. Give it words, right? Identify the emotions. I hear that you're feeling very sad. I hear that you're very disappointed. I hear that you're frustrated. I hear whatever it is. You have to understand emotions to be able to identify, because when you can tell them what you heard from them, that shows them how much you're really listening and identifying with them. T is tone, because tone of voice conveys over 38% of the non-verbal emotional content of what a person communicates. So tone is vital to empathy. In other words, what we say is very much expressed in the tone of our voice. So therefore, this doctor writes, when you talk to someone, you match their tone. Don't be too loud as if I'm the master and you're the student and the follower and I'm lecturing you. Don't be too loud. Don't be quiet and meek. Match their tone. So you're really talking to each other. And then also use a soothing tone. Not just matching, but also use something soothing. There's a way to talk that uplifts and empowers someone, gives them more encouragement. And finally, actually, she writes, when a person is communicating outrage, then you should not be matching their tone. Moderate your voice rather than matching theirs is more appropriate. So that's T for tone. H is for hearing. Too often we don't truly listen to each other, right? For all kinds of reasons, preconceptions, I'm filtering what you're telling me through my lens, through my mind, through my worldview, which means I'm totally not interested or connecting with your worldview or your place. So I'm not truly listening. Listening is when my mind is a blank canvas. I'm not thinking my thoughts. I'm not making my judgments. I'm not processing my opinions. I'm a blank canvas, and everything you're telling me is painting my canvas so I completely understand you without the filter of going through me. That's called hearing. And finally, Y is your response. Not so much what you're going to say next, but how you resonate with the person you're talking to. Whether or not we're aware of it, we tend to sync up emotionally with people, and how well we do it plays a role in how much we understand and like them. So your response meaning, are you really concerned? Are you really interested? Do they find favor? Do you have hope in them? Do you have faith in them? Do you have an interest and a commitment to be there for them and to help them? So if you follow EMPATHY and all of those things they stand for, those are the steps it will take to have an empathetic conversation. An empathetic conversation will allow you to truly connect with someone, not in a shallow way, not in a superficial, artificial way, but in a genuine way. And then, if that person needs your help, you can be helpful. And the same is the flip side. You also need to recognize when you're going through something, a prisoner cannot heal themselves. You can't redeem yourself. You have to know that someone else can help you. And you have to be able and comfortable to find that person you trust and reach out to them. Gary says transformational relationships begin with empathetic listening. 100%. That's why people suffer in relationships. They're not very good at it because empathetic listening is key. So I'll tell you one more teaching. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon writes as follows: Daga belev ish yashchena, which means when you have a worry in your heart, yashchena, you should minimalize it. You should diminish it. You should try to remove it. Well, shkoyach. How do you remove it? So the Gemara has two interpretations of the word yashchena. You take the shin of yashchena, and it could be one of two things. One is you turn it into a samach. Shin, sin, samach, they are interchangeable. Trust me on that. So not yashchena, but yosichena. Yosichena comes from the word hesach hadas, which means allow it to slip your mind. Forget about it. Sometimes you're having a worry, you're having a distress, you're having an anxiety, and sometimes the reason why you're anxious is because you're anxious. And if you allow yourself to let go, let it go. It doesn't exist. Then it goes away. It's only there because you're making it be there, because your thoughts about it are getting it all more and more worked up. And if you could just stop thinking about it, it wouldn't be there anymore. It's not a real thing. So one solution is remove it from your mind. But sometimes you're unable to do that. You're so caught up. You're so trapped in it, you can't remove it. So if you can't help yourself and you can't remove it, then we turn the shin into a sin and we do yesichena, which means you should speak it over la'achem with other people. When you have a daga, a worry, a concern in your mind, you have to share it with somebody. Because you connecting with someone else, someone that is able to truly empathize with you, can be like the Rebbe Yochanan will give you their hand to your hand. You'll become a yedid, you'll become a true friend. You'll create a true, genuine connection with each other. And that hand will have the power of touch, even if it's not a physical touch, or if it is a physical touch, but it'll have healing powers to it. And it's not necessarily what they're going to advise you so much. It's more so that they're there for you and they're listening, and you'll notice that itself could be so therapeutic and so healing. So, friends, that is the importance of empathy. No true relationship, no true connections, no true help can happen without empathy. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to always say, when people were going through medical challenges, you should seek the advice from a Rofeh Yedid. A Rofeh is a doctor, a Yedid is a friend. You don't go to a friend who has no medical background. It's like searching up Google, right? You search up Google because your nail hurts. You're going to die tomorrow. You have to go to a Rofeh. At first, you have to go to a doctor. But there's two kinds of doctors. There's a doctor that's your Yedid, your friend, or a doctor that's not your Yedid. Not because the doctor's a bad doctor. But a doctor, if he doesn't know you, or has no connection, or no invested emotional interest in you, will be professional, will offer you advice. But there's a Rafa Yedid, and someone who has an emotional investment in your life, because they know you, they care about you, they know your life's background, they're going to treat you in a different way. A Rafa Yedid, a doctor who can be empathetic. And it's difficult for doctors and professionals to be always empathetic, because you have to know, on the one hand, I have to feel your plight, but then I also have to know how to stay a little distant, because otherwise I'm going to become you. I'll become the sick person. I've got to be the healthy person to help you. It's a balance, which I have another story for that, but I'm way over time. So just to conclude, Yedid. Learn how to find a Yedidim in life. Learn how to be a Yedid to others, because Yedidim come together and create a more wholesome world, a more genuine life with each other, and a world of Yedidim is a world that will be healed. So thank you everybody for joining. God bless you. Be healthy, be safe, and see you next week, same time, same place. Gute Nacht.